It's this edition of Through the Gears presented by Front Stretch. I'm your host, Tino Pattigno, and I can't wait to get back into this weekend's NASCAR racing and betting and winning action for Michigan Speedway. The craziest race I've ever seen, or at least one of them, in terms of the finishes at Richmond. We'll get into all of that. We have an action-packed show, so let's get right into it. But before we do just that, gotta give a special shout out to everyone who commented on the last video. Had a lot of comments, so really appreciate that. And I gotta say thank you very much to Marcus, Crystal Sparkle, Kyle B8, Kai Fried, Donald Field. Thank you guys so much for commenting. Really means the world to me, and keep doing so. I love talking with you guys and answering any questions you may have with NASCAR betting. So without further ado, let's go through the gears. Joining us now as we go through the gears is the one and only Wyatt Watson, the recurring superstar guest, and you guys may recognize us as we hosted the Stock Car Scoop together this past weekend, breaking everything down from Richmond, as that was a crazy race. We'll get into the Richmond recap, but if you want our immediate thoughts on everything that happened that night, you can also tune in there for a full, longer breakdown in the Stock Car Scoop. So appreciate Front Stretch for giving us the opportunity to host that. And now we're back for Through the Gears. Time to make some money here in this one. Wyatt, how you doing? And what were your thoughts post-Richmond after all that craziness?
Feeling great. On the go now. I'm going to be going to St. Louis in this weekend for the IndyCar race once again. My thoughts haven't changed too much from Richmond because as of the recording of this episode, we have not gotten a clear response from NASCAR in terms of penalties. But after Richmond, I mean, from a betting standpoint, I hope you had Austin Dillon on your card, because that is a wild, crazy underdog win, 100-1 at one point, from what I've been told. What a weekend for that, and what a great, and for all y'all that had either Denny or Joey Logano at the end of that, I feel for y'all. So hopefully we can make some money this week going to Michigan.
Yeah, well, so Wyatt, that's the biggest thing that I wanted to talk about too, was NASCAR is, I think, the only sport where you can have one driver leading. In Joey Logano, he had about a 10-1 chance to win. Then Denny Hamlin potentially looking like he was going to win. A 5-1 driver that had a chance to win there. But no, the winner was not the 10-1, not the 5-1. It was the 100-1 Austin Dillon, who at that time was in first, second, third, and ultimately goes and gets the victory. I feel like NASCAR is the only sport where we can see line movement like that, especially at the end of a race. And to me, anyone who bet Austin Dillon, congratulations, because that was one of the biggest tickets I've ever seen cash, especially so far this season. That was one of the bigger ones. Even Austin Cindric at Gateway was not as big as the 100-1 Austin Dillon going into Richmond. And I think, like you said, we said a lot in the Stock Car Scoop. You guys can check out more of our thoughts there. But I think we got to look ahead, especially with no penalties released yet. Anything would be speculation, whether if they penalize or suspend Austin Dillon, they're definitely going to penalize him in some way. Same thing with Joey Logano for his pit road actions, but we'll see more about that. We'll have some thoughts. If you guys have any comments about that or want to know what we think, you can comment on this video as well. But now let's stick to the betting side of things. Let's stick to making some money, because unfortunately, from a betting side, also at Richmond, the only thing that hit for me on my betting card was Bubba Wallace's top 10. I love to bet my Bubba top 10, and he's been coming through recently. He's on a tear, a bunch of top fives now recently, and their team is just executing the way they need to be. Right now, he's sort of in the playoffs, but that might not last long if we keep seeing surprise winners. So ultimately, Christopher Bell and Martin Truex Jr. as well need to mention those two drivers, because Bell speeding on pit road would have looked like he was going to win the race, even against Austin Dillon with how fast that car was. And then MTJ, engine issues. These are things that we consistently see. And I wanted to bring them up because these are two drivers that could potentially win at Michigan. Last year, Martin Truex Jr. was the fastest car at that track. Well, at least up until Chris Buescher. And same thing with Christopher Bell. He was leading, and then he spun out racing hard with Alex Bowman. So Bell and Truex, two drivers that I bet on to win the race last week outright, heading into Michigan, where they looked like they were going to win there and also had problems. Wyatt, I want to get your thoughts on those two drivers. you don't have to tell us if you're betting on them just yet or anything like that, but what are your outlook? And with how they performed last week, now can they flip the switch and potentially win or at least have a good run at Michigan this week?
Oh, absolutely. They're on my radar for sure. Bell, again, as you said, and Truex, again, they had both great runs last year, Michigan. That's what I mainly put my prep into, is that JGR looked very fast. Those two specifically looked absolutely dominant going into that weekend. And spoiler alert, they're not even the favorites going into this week. And I think that's the craziest thing that the books are overviewing, is that you got to look, we don't have a 2 mile oval to go off of this year. And from their speed that they showed last season, they have to be looked at as favorites. I'm absolutely flabbergasted that they are not. But yeah, they're certainly 100% on my radar, especially with how fast Bell looked at Richmond. They have kind of a good momentum going. Truex, again, just was the dominant car there at Michigan last year. Obviously, Chris Buescher came alive in the end of that race due to great strategy and then improving in that race from a performance aspect. But they have to, I mean, they are high on the list. They're just not in favorite territory in terms of their numbers. And we'll go over that in a little bit.
Yeah, and that's definitely surprising to me too. And the one thing that you mentioned that is definitely something that we need to prepare for as we get into the prep for things here at Michigan is we can't really take that much away. One thing I wanted to note was Kansas is a little bit of a comparable track in this one. The way I kind of view that is the high speeds, the way they race there in terms of sort of using the high line, utilizing the speed off of corner exit. I feel like from that standpoint, we can kind of use the speeds that they've raced at Kansas to see who will be fast at Michigan. One other thing that's important to note from that standpoint too was the drivers who were fast at Michigan last year, Buescher, Truex, Larson's always been good there, and those types of drivers, Bell too, they were fast at Kansas this year. So for me, that's why I think Kansas could be a track we could look at. But why? What about you in terms of the tracks and anything we can take comparisons and data wise?
I can agree from that perspective. I could actually agree slightly with how fast they are from Kansas. I personally don't think Kansas is a great 50-50. Like you could take Kansas and take it as gospel going into Michigan. Really, it used to be Auto Club was the only one you could really go after and say, well, it's also a D-shaped oval, and we could compare and contrast that way going into Michigan. We don't really have a track that I'd say Kansas is probably the closest that we've ran that looks awfully similar towards it, how we run the high lane and whatnot. But I'd say Michigan's more of a middle to maybe even like you can go towards the bottom out there. It's just the fact that we only go here once a year. We have to use 2023 really. You could use 22. It's hard to use Gen 6 data as much. Like I would love to pull the trigger on maybe doing an Austin Dillon top 10 prop or maybe a top 5 prop, but he used to be great here in the Gen 6, but I couldn't tell you last time he ran solid here and if he ever ran solid here in the Gen 7 without trying to pull up some numbers quickly, but I digress on that point. Like I said, it's really, I have to use what we know from last year. And I think that's a good enough comparison based on how those drivers have been performing just this year. The only thing that I worry about, and in terms of the Truex and Bell thing, going back on that, is the reliability issues of Joe Gibbs Racing. They've had a blown engine probably the last 4 races. Truex was the unlucky one last week. Ty Gibbs has had the unlucky engine like multiple weeks, it feels like. The question is, can they stop that trend and having blown engines and mechanical failures during the race? That's the only thing that is making me worried about betting on Joe Gibbs this week.
And those are great points too, because if that has happened and continued to happen too, I think we've seen that since Pocono, maybe even a little bit before then. And it's something that's at
Sonoma,
least,
yeah.
yeah, Sonoma too, great example. So I think to me, it's like it was a little bit under the radar at first, like okay, maybe a one-off engine issue, it happens. But then now to consecutively put together not only the engine issues, but in different cars. Hamlin, Ty
Gibbs.
Gibbs, Truex,
Yep.
exactly. And then one other thing you mentioned too that I thought was a great point was taking a look at Michigan from last year, right? And sort of that would be our best way of sort of putting together our card here, at least seeing who may be good. Obviously, things could change, but Kansas, like you said, could be 50-50. So let's just go ahead right now and take a look at the top 10 from Michigan last year before we get into the odds breakdown. Chris Buescher obviously won that race. It was a battle between him and Martin Truex Jr. I feel like those two cars, the 19 was the fastest the entire day, but the 17 really came along at the end of those stages there. So those two guys separated themselves from everyone else on this top 10 list. I feel like the 19 was one of the fastest cars last year that I've seen all season. So Buescher, Truex, Denny Hamlin third, Brad Keselowski in fourth. Like we talk about, RFK always finishing within each other, at least 4 to 5 positions. Those two cars are always set up to be very similar. So Brad Keselowski fourth, Kyle Larson fifth, Daniel Suarez sixth place. A great race for him there. And after what they did at Richmond, I could see him having another strong run at Michigan in this one. Ross Chastain, 7th. Kevin Harvick, who doesn't matter anymore since he's retired, 8th. Ryan Blaney, 9th. And Eric Jones in 10th. So to me, Wyatt, is there anyone on that list that sort of stands out to you here before we get into the odds breakdown of whether they finished inside the top 10 or if they were, having such a strong run in the entire day that you want to talk about or think about heading into this one?
Well, you're making me think now. Daniel Suarez, 6th.
Mhm.
That pops out a lot. Now I remember, I think Chastain also had a really good run here as well, but got caught up in lap traffic and a very bad caution. I think that's worth noting. But I think Suarez is just on a high right now. Had a great run at Richmond. Obviously played that option tire strategy right. But if he and Trackhouse roll out with that speed, which I am skeptical about because I look at bigger tracks like Indianapolis and they did not have the speed there. I don't know. It's interesting. It's a good point, but I have to kind of view it from a cautious measure. A top 10 prop might be worth it, I think. That is interesting. And here's one we haven't even discussed yet. Remember Tyler Reddick?
Yeah.
If it weren't for his pit crew, it was going to be a 3-car battle, honestly. And it looked like Reddick had the car to beat in the closing stages. Getting him up there and getting him in position, which their team did, is just unfortunate that their pit crew didn't tighten up their tire on the final stop. And it would have been tough to pass Reddick. He was such a fast car, and he needs to be, and it should be worthwhile to consider him for this weekend getting the win as well, especially with how damn consistent they've been. It's been incredible to see.
Another second place finish for him too in Richmond. Taking a look at the odds breakdown now, Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson come out as the favorites, and that's sort of where they've usually been all season long. Plus 550, plus 650. Honestly, decent value for Larson, I would say, but he hasn't really been as dominant at Michigan as he has been in the past, at least in the beginning of his career when he had 3 victories at this track. Now, Ryan Blaney, Martin Truex Jr., and Tyler Reddick are next. They're ranging from plus 800 to plus 850 on DraftKings specifically, and that's where I really want to take a look at Tyler Reddick. We alluded to him, and we're talking about the prep and talking about how fast he has been and how consistent and how many top 2 finishes he has. Plus 850 for Reddick, I think is good value in this one, but let's move on a little bit further here. And hey, Wyatt, we might have to talk about the guys who are 100 to 1 to win this one, considering what happened with Austin Dillon last week. So Joey Logano, Christopher Bell, they're plus 1,000 to plus 1,100. And this one, Brad Keselowski plus 1,400. William Byron in the same category. He got taken out of this race early on last year. Chris Buescher plus 1,400 as well. So we talked about him having one of the fastest cars and obviously winning the race last year. pretty insane value, I would say, for a driver that dominated this race in terms of going toe-to-toe with Truex and winning the race. I don't think I've seen a driver come out with this much value despite winning the year or the race prior. Chase Elliott also 14-1. And then we get into the guys who I would call underdogs. Ty Gibbs, Bubba Wallace, those two are 20-1. Bubba might be on my card. Stay tuned for that. Ross Chastain, Kyle Busch, 28-1. Bowman, 30-1. And then we get into the underdogs and we go to the long shots. Daniel Suarez, 45-1. Josh Berry, Hocevar, Cindric, Gregson, all 80-1 and up. And hey, we got to mention his name. Austin Dillon is 130-1 to win this one. And I'm only saying that because I didn't mention him last week being 100-1, and maybe I should have. One other guy too, which is wild to see, Chase Briscoe, 150-1 to win this one. I'm not saying he's gonna. I don't think he would be, but the fact that his odds are that high is pretty insane to see. So if the underdogs and the long shots continue to win races, it's going to be major payouts for some people. Now, Wyatt, we talked about everyone on the list basically there, from the favorites to the long shots and the underdogs. Which drivers stand out to you the most from a value point and just from the odds wise? Which drivers are you maybe disappointed about to see their value or intriguing with what their number and their line is set at?
I don't think I'm really quite disappointed at all with a lot of numbers. As you know, I love shopping and finding good value from a lot of other sports books and whatnot. I found a couple of interesting lines that are better than DraftKings. I'll go with, first of all, the ones that are the best from DraftKings and others. Tyler Reddick's 850, I think is very conservative from the books based off his performance last season and whatnot. I think that's a very good number. Christopher Bell plus 1,000 is very, very great value for one that could easily be in the 500-600 level, much like Hamlin and Larson are. But some I found offline off of DraftKings. Martin Truex Jr. is a plus 1,000 on FanDuel.
Wow.
And that is a very generous number comparing to, I think, 750 on DraftKings off the top of my head. That's an incredible number that I love to see going based off the fact that he had the dominant car all day last year. And another one to mention, former Michigan winner, I think Ryan Blaney might have a little bit of a chance with how fast they are. Plus 850 is a very good number off of FanDuel. And I like to see that number as well. But the longest shot I have going into this weekend, I have Bubba Wallace at 2,500 off FanDuel that I would touch as well. Those are great numbers that I like seeing. I am surprised by that Chase Briscoe plus 150-1. That's crazy, but I think it's very makes sense because of how bad Stewart-Haas Racing has been on the bigger tracks and their speed and the speed that they've shown. I mean, you could probably try to hit them for a top 10, but you'd have to get lucky. Honestly, it comes down to just that. I'd say other ones that I'd be interested in, not for quite the race win, but I'll always like looking at Carson Hocevar or others for top 10 props. I mean, Austin Dillon for a top 10 prop is very manageable, very doable. Todd Gilliland, I always like to mention. He's a show favorite here.
Yeah.
Noah Gragson hasn't had a lot of consistency. I think that number is well warranted going into this weekend, and the fact that I think technically this is his first. We're now getting to the point where this is now some of his first time Cup starts here, because this is the track he was suspended at going in. So his numbers are going to look a little bit more conservative going forward for some of these tracks coming up. But that's really my thought right now. I don't see a number I hate per se, or I'm not going to touch that. Like, all these numbers are very fair this week. There's not other than Hamlin and Larson, there's not really an outright guy sticking out and I've shopping around. There's very good, very high value going forward.
I think the one thing too that we need to mention is Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace is now third in the total next gen speed rankings at this track with a 5.5 average. Christopher Bell as well, who we talked about in 6 out of the last 10 races heading to Michigan. He had a top 2 speed ranking. That's Christopher Bell. And this is all shout out to iFantasy Race there. Go check him out. He does great stuff, great stats and data that we can use to help us, elevate ourselves and potentially nab some outright winners in this one. So those are two drivers that he mentioned. And one other guy that I thought about too, or at least guys that could fit this mold, would be if you're fast in qualifying, you will be fast enough to win this race. I believe the last 4 races, the winner has started inside the top 4 at this track. So to me, that's something that I've been sort of looking at to see who's going to be fast in qualifying and who could potentially get that top spot. I think if you qualify inside the top 5, that'll help you significantly with the average speed going into the long runs of this race. So Wyatt, let's get into the outright winner segment now. This is what everyone's been waiting for. This is what the people want to see. I think in terms of Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson, I'm going to wait off them. I don't want to touch any of the favorites right now. I think if one of them does go out and qualify top 5, maybe I'll add them to my card, but they're already the favorites. I don't see the numbers going down much more than they're already at right now. The 2 drivers that I said I must bet on this week were Tyler Reddick, plus 850, like you said, great value, and Martin Truex Jr. at plus 800. I feel like I am on a crazy train in a path of destruction whenever I bet on MTJ. Whenever I have him to win outright, it seems like anything that can go wrong does go wrong for that 19 team, but I just don't want to miss it. I just think he can win. Like at Richmond, he looked like he could win. He was in position. He was at least a top 3 car. They had it, if there was a late race, restart, he was going to do whatever it took. I'm not saying Austin Dillon style, but he was definitely going to try to get a win in his last season. To me, I think he's sort of in the same spot at Michigan with how fast that car was. I expect him, much like Tyler Reddick, to go off and be the leader and to dominate this race. Those are the 2. I'll give 2 drivers now and 2 drivers with higher value after we get your thoughts. But between those 2 drivers, do you agree with Truex and Reddick, or is there a different direction you're thinking about for your first couple outright winners here?
No, we're actually right on the same page here, especially with I'd throw Christopher Bell into that conversation, really a top 3 for me, because Bell, fast, just got wrecked. He really needs to avoid pit issues. It has bitten him more than I can really count this year, and it really showed up at Richmond this weekend as well. Stay out of trouble. He's got a great car and a great team. Avoid the engine blow up that his teammates has been in as well, and he will be hunky-dory. Martin Truex Jr., same thing. Avoid the engine problem and stay in control. Plus 1,000 is a number on FanDuel I will not miss there. That's a great number. And Tyler Reddick at a plus 850 is fair for him. He's been knocking on the door of a win. He was in position last year. It makes sense to bet on him this week to get the outright win. I'd cover that bet with a top 3 as well, just because he's been running his average. I think last time I heard was 3.6 over the last 5 races or 6 races, something in between that number. So it's those 3 make the most sense to bet in terms of a value pick. You're absolutely correct on Hamlin and Larson. I just checked FanDuel again. It's plus 650 and plus 700 for those, those aren't favorite numbers from my perspective. I actually love those numbers. It's just, I might touch that 700 number. It's just, I don't know. I don't want to stretch myself too thin or miss out or have someone like Austin Dillon win again and I'd be out hundreds at that point, or whatever units that you want to use. Please bet responsibly. But those are the 3 I am the most confident and most prepared to bet on. I mean, you might as well for us three, you might as well start looking at the Toyota prop and see what Toyota wins just to cover that one.
No, that's true. That's a great point, and I think that's definitely something we'll take a look at too. Is what Toyota's line is when we get into the prop bets, because that is definitely
plus 120
to keep in mind. Plus 120. So and it's for plus 22. Now
that's the favorite.
The only drivers that I could see getting in the way of that, and honestly, I mean, aside from Larson, I don't really see any Chevys that could really mess that up. But what I could see would be a Ford driver. And that Ford driver is Chris Buescher. I might have to add him to the list at plus 1,400. I think these next three races before the NASCAR playoffs, that 17 car will be on my outright winners list every single week, because he can win at this track. He can obviously win at Daytona. Anyone can, but he was dominant there for the past few years now. And then at Darlington, too. I mean, if he doesn't win at these two next tracks, I might go all in on the 17 for Darlington because of how well they raced there earlier this season. And I do believe Buescher is going to make the NASCAR playoffs. And if he does so, it's looking like he's going to need a win. So, Wyatt, what about Buescher? Are you thinking about him or any other Fords in this one?
I wasn't thinking about him earlier with the 1,400 number. And again, I looked at FanDuel, and he's sitting at 20-1. And that 20-1,
that's a major difference.
That 20-1 number is such a major difference. That is over I think a third of the value that DraftKings has on him right now, and of an increase at least. I like that number, and I think I would shoot that number too. Honestly, with FanDuel, I've used FanDuel a lot. I started DraftKings when I went to Iowa the last time I was on the show. Did not cash out there, unfortunately, even with the bonus bets. That was an unfortunate one. But anyway, with Chris Buescher, I do love that 21 number. And listen, it's time to go. And I mean, he got in pit road problems at Richmond where he won last year, but at the same time, it was a night race. It's kind of different. I understand that he was really not in the driver's seat for winning that race, to be fair, but as you said, going back to your Kansas comparison, if you want to go with that, he was right there. He was in the mix, and if he was in the mix there,
if the trends continue, if he does qualify inside the top 10, as we've seen most winners come from that position at Michigan, that number is going to be cut in half. The closing line value will be insane. So to me, I mean, I normally do like to wait until after practice and qualifying for some outright winners. But at this point, if the trends continue and if the data remains the same, might as well bet on him now earlier in the week. So that's one other driver I'm glad that is on both of our cards here now. Wyatt, one more outright winner for you that I have. And I also want to know if you have anyone that's more of a long shot, more of an underdog play in this one. To me, my long shot, and maybe it's not too long because it's the same price as Buescher on FanDuel, but that's going to be Bubba Wallace, 20-1 for him, and he's raced really strongly here as well. Now, if Tyler Reddick's been fast, Denny Hamlin's been fast at this track multiple years in a row, I think, and Bubba Wallace has just been strong on his own, but I think those two drivers will do whatever it takes to get that 23 car into the playoffs. If he's racing around them at the end, I can definitely see them helping him out, and I can definitely see him using everything he can. He's really strong on the longer, faster tracks, obviously super speedways, but also whenever we go to Kansas, he's won there before. So if we're going to take that away from it, I feel like Bubba can be strong at this racetrack. We've seen drivers below the cut line or around the cut line winning races now. The urgency is up, and I think that 23 car could be in a prime position to capitalize on that this weekend.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Bubba Wallace is a former winner here in the Truck Series. That was such an emotional win, big win for him in his career. 25-1 on FanDuel. And yeah, I alluded to him earlier. He is absolutely hammered down on my list here going into it. I mean, Buescher, like I said, Buescher was really close until I saw that 21 number. It's like, okay, I got to go for that. But 25-1, 20-1, I think 20-1 absolutely is great. 25-1 is even better, and it's go time for them too. I mean, going all out 23-11 with Tyler Reddick having such a fast car, Bubba Wallace having consistent runs here. He almost won here in, I believe, 2022 when Harvick beat him. So he's been good here in the next gen as well. You could put a full race together. 25 Bubba Wallace at 25-1 would not surprise me to be a contender here before we even start this weekend. 25-1 is a great number for that. I would totally hammer down that number.
Yeah, love that number. I think the main takeaway that we've realized now is to shop around, because the main takeaway too is that FanDuel is having better odds than DraftKings at this point. I like that we are able to discuss that and see where the lines are better. FanDuel right now dominating DraftKings in that category. So if you are, going to follow and ride with some of these bets we're talking about, it seems like FanDuel would be the move to go onto that sports book and place the bets there rather than DraftKings, who has the same guys, but just for lesser value in this one. And to me, there's no reason not to shop around and get the better value there, because I was sold on the 20-1. You mentioned 25, I'm in even more. And that way we can also allocate our units. Even if you can put more down, or it makes you more confident, you can put more. It's all up to you guys to bet responsibly, like Wyatt said as well. But I think that's I really love our betting card for the outright winners there. I really think going into the weekend, we have a strong outlook about who's going to be fast, and using Michigan last year and also Kansas a little bit can really help us, I believe. And heading into this one, that the top 5 guys, when they qualify there, do have the best shot of winning this race like we've seen in the past. So the closing line value will be big on some of these drivers with higher value. Keep that in mind. Now let's talk about some of the prop bets in this one. I think one driver that I want to talk about right away here is for a top 10, and that's Daniel Suarez plus money, plus 165 for a top 10. Finished, what we say, 6th in this race last year. Had a great run at Richmond. The vibes are high for him. He just won a race in Brazil. He got married, had a couple weeks off. He's now back and looking better than ever. I love Daniel Suarez top 10 at plus 165 on DraftKings. Wyatt, are you seeing any better value out there for that, and any other drivers you like for a top 10 in this one?
And I'm looking right now. First of all, I'll say Carson Hocevar. I had him plus 375 on ESPN bets, but I just found him plus 400 on FanDuel again. I love taking those odds. What did you say the value was on Daniel Suarez
Plus
for top 10?
165.
I got and FanDuel wins again here. We got plus 230 on FanDuel. Plus 230. I do like that number, honestly. Now that with the mention of him doing well here last season, 230 is a great number. I love that. I actually really love that prop. Going back on my notes here real quick, but Tyler Reddick at a top 3 is plus 270. That's up from 260 on FanDuel. Not much there, but still, I love the value. I think Tyler Reddick getting a top 3 has been so automatic every week, except for Pocono. Of course, the 1 week I bet he doesn't get a top 3. But I promise you guys, if everything goes well, he has a car that will run has top 3 pace here. I am willing to bet once again that he will be up here challenging for a top 3 finish here at Michigan. Others to note, of course, Bubba Wallace. If we're going to bet for him the outright, his top 3 is a plus 550. I like his top 5 more at a plus 260 via DraftKings. I, of course, will shop around more to see his value elsewhere. But if we're going to bet Bubba Wallace 23-11 and how strong they are here, it's well worth it to bet the top 5 elsewhere on any of your sports book that you go on. Chris Buescher's plus 250 for a top 5 on FanDuel as well. Looks pretty decent. Christopher Bell's at plus 130. I don't know about that, but that's an okay number. His top 5 on FanDuel is a plus 370. I'm just spitting out numbers for you here, just to get a good outlook of what we're looking for and what drivers we're already going to put money on. I like all those numbers. I love that 230 for you on Daniel Suarez, though, Tino.
Yeah, me too. I think that, and FanDuel wins again, like you said, and I love the plus 165, and now I'm hammering the plus 230 for Suarez. I just think that makes a lot of sense with everything we've seen out of him. And for top 5s too, I mean, I'm looking at a bunch of drivers that do have value. Truex at plus 105 for a top 5 finish in this one. That's something that, although we need to be cautious, right? Because I thought he was a lock for at least a top 10 last week, and then he goes and blows his engine. So I think that's something that we do need to be cautious about, is the Toyota engine struggles right now. But If we put that aside, Martin Truex Jr. at this track plus 105 for a top 5 is great value in this one. I also like Tyler Reddick plus 115, it looks like, for a top 5 finish. Those are two drivers that we like to win the race outright, so might as well bet them for a top 5, might as well bet them for a top 3 if they do come up short, if there is someone that surprises us there that we're not expecting to go out and win this race. Another driver that I saw as well was someone that we keep talking about, Chris Buescher at plus 180 for a top 5. I like all those drivers for a top 5. Daniel Suarez was probably my favorite top 10 bet as of now. But one thing that I also want to get into is the manufacturer bets. We're talking about Toyota winning this race because we're talking about Bubba Wallace, Tyler Reddick, Martin Truex Jr., Christopher Bell. Obviously, Denny Hamlin will have a shot. To me, all of those guys are obviously Toyotas. So I'm thinking Toyota's going to win this race. The only one that that messes it up would be Chris Buescher at plus 130 for Toyota to be the winning manufacturer. I don't normally bet on these manufacturer picks because I feel like the value doesn't come with it. But at this racetrack with the drivers that we consider to win this race, plus 130 on DraftKings, I feel like is great value for us to pretty much capitalize on Toyota winning this race. That might bring us to the favorite plays because Toyota win this race outright, the manufacturer. That I might have to go with that being my favorite play because I think that just makes the most sense with what our card looks like right now. Shout out to my guy Full Tank with Phil because this is how he kind of structures his betting card every week. He was on the show and he talked about it with us so far this season. What he does is he takes whoever he thinks is going to win the race from a manufacturer standpoint, puts his units on there, and then the only few drivers that aren't going to win the race, but not from the same manufacturer, he then puts and allocates his unit towards in the outright winner. So for us, that would be betting heavy on Toyota to win the manufacturer, and then maybe throwing in a Chris Buescher, maybe throwing in another driver that, even if you want to double up on that, Bubba Wallace long shot, or another Toyota driver. But if you're going to go heavy on the manufacturer, there's no reason to double up, really. I would go heavy on the manufacturer, throw in a Chris Buescher, maybe a Brad Keselowski as another RFK driver there as well. Maybe if you want to go with an underdog Chevy play or even a Kyle Larson, I think then it gives you the opportunity to do so. So if I were to pick a single driver to win outright, it would be Tyler Reddick plus 850 presents us with the best value. I think that would be my favorite play there. For an underdog, the Chris Buescher on FanDuel, 25-1, definitely my favorite value from that standpoint for a driver that is a Ford. But for a top play, I think it's going to be Toyota winning this race from a manufacturer standpoint. Why? What about you? What's some of your favorite plays in this one?
My favorite plays for this in the Cup Series, we got Truex at 1,000. I love that play. Bell at 1,000 as well. Those are just numbers you cannot ever pass up on for those guys. They're very strong again last year, and we got to go with that. I like both Buescher and Wallace's numbers, 20-1 Buescher, 25-1 on Wallace. Those are absolutely fantastic numbers that put a smile on my face, especially if they hit. And then as you said, the 130 number for Toyota is desirable. Maybe not my favorite play just because of the lowness of the number. Would have to put a lot of units on that just to hope that goes on, and that'll be a big sweat if anyone but Chris Buescher is the one challenging that card. And it's a massive win if it's one of our Toyotas we picked going for the win there. So I love those. To close it out for me though, to go into Xfinity, I love looking at Xfinity numbers. Earliest numbers I could find were both off ESPN bets. So be on the lookout from your favorite sports book on other numbers coming out. I'm sure they're better than this. But John Hunter Nemechek is a 5-1 to win the Xfinity race.
Wow.
And we're talking about the guy that won here last year after wrecking. So Joe Gibbs Racing in the Xfinity race and the Xfinity series at this track has been dominant. It's hard to bet against Joe Gibbs Racing in the Xfinity series here. I would put my money on John Hunter going back-to-back, 5-1, and he's been a menace this season when he does his Xfinity starts.
That'll close it out for this week's episode. I feel like the main themes of this week's episode was shop around for better value, The Toyotas are going to be fast, and be aware of the closing line value as well. We know the fast drivers that qualify inside the top 10, inside the top 5 rather, show the best speed and the best chances of winning the race. Is there anywhere that people can follow you with and keep up with everything you're doing this weekend? You're about to head on a big drive. Let them know what you'll be doing. Let them know where you can find you, and let them know what you'll be doing this weekend for a front stretch in this one.
Going St. Louis for IndyCar. I'm excited for that. I have a new handle on Twitter, Wyatt W Racing. That is Wyatt W Racing on Twitter. Once again, see what I got going on at the track there at Gateway, and I'm excited. Let's make some money here, Tino.
Let's make some money. I know I'll be tuned in, and I hope you guys are as well. So much again to Wyatt for coming on the show. Really appreciate when he can stop by and give us some of his best bets for the week. I'm super excited to be back racing at Michigan in this one. Michigan should be such a fun, exciting track, and I hope we do cash on all of our bets there. Let me know who you think is going to win the race in the comments below. Leave a like, subscribe to the Front Stretch Podcast Network, and stay tuned to the Stock Car Scoop for your post-race coverage. I'm Tino Pattigno. You can follow me on social media at Tino, Pattigno, and I'll see you guys next week as we go through the gears.